Okay, so we want to get into these new moons. So there's 3 new moons, but one of them is an eclipse. One in 1984 was an eclipse, and the full moon after that was an eclipse. So I have the dots, and I put an X over it, over the dot, just to highlight the X's, the full moon on both sides, and the X's on the new moon. So the new moon, they're black, and there's a line joining the sun and moon. You can see where the new moons are. So you can see the cycle of the timing going around it. So I've only marked the timing of the new moons and full moons here. But once you have the new moon, you can get the phases going up until there's the full moon, and you're going to have the phases, 8 phases of the moon, and 8 phases of the moon coming at the full. And the phase you're going through in your progress chart is your spiritual phases and the spiritual struggles you have to go through and what you're working with at this time. And you go through each of the phases across 28 years. It's a really valuable phase to go through, to work in and interpret with. So it's okay. So that's basically the points. But these points are very active. I'm not going to bore you with more of my stuff. But anyways, these are really personal and deep things that happen to me. Someone else may have them up in the 10th house. Someone where your new moons, where your sun is and where it's going, that's where the new moons are going to come, where your progressed sun goes. And the oppositions will come opposed it. So you're going to have certain area of your house of your chart accentuated. And this new moon that was the eclipse was conjunct my Venus. It was a really deeply emotional connection at that time. 84. That was when I split up with my wife. Yeah, the second wife, number 2. I just broke away. Okay, but so in that time period, I bought the house at the IC, and then the marriage, it lasted a year and it didn't last much longer than that. So it was a great place. I was glad to have it, part of my memories, but it really wasn't a stable investment. I could have kept it, but I felt it by the time the marriage ended, I felt the house was jinxed, and I let it go. Then the market values jumped up 100% the next 6 months later, and I never had enough money to go into market, into buying a place again. So okay. So yeah, the progressed moon phases. I put the time for the progressed angles on here. On the other chart, you have the time for the squares to the moon, so you can have those timings on it. But these phases, and whether they're when the moon's above and below the horizon, always my new moons are below the horizon, and the full moons are when the moon's above the horizon. And it works like that. So, okay, I spent an hour talking about my chart. That's enough. We got to figure out how to calculate this so you get it for your chart. Okay, so I want to. These are calculations I had to do. And I did it using WinStar. So I'm going to go in WinStar in a minute and show you how to do it. But I had to do the progressed moon to the natal moon, just to, like transits to natal, the progressed moon, and just put the conjunction. I put all the aspects in, and I highlighted when the conjunctions and the oppositions came in to see the new moons and the full moons. This is how I've got the new moons and full moons. Okay, gives us the date, the progressed date, the aspect, the exact degree, the moon to moon. So like this is all just the moon to the moon, and across 90 years. I could have made it 100, but it did 90 years in the program. It's set for that. And then I had to do another calculation of the moon. Really, it put the moon going through the houses, but also when it hit the angles, ascendant and MC, the ascendant, the descendant. Yeah, just the conjunct the ascendant, oppose the MC, oppose the ascendant, conjunct. So conjuncts or opposes the ascendant gave the signs, but really it gives it for each house cusp, the date. But I really, for the graphic, I just wanted the dates for the when it crossed the angles, when the moon crossed the angles. And then I did a report, I did a printout for the moon, just the moon making every aspect to every planet, to everything, anything going on, sextiles, conjunctions, every aspect, the main basic standard aspects, and then including sextiles, trines, and then also when it changed sign, when it changed houses, all the dates are all together on this one, and the moon aspects to itself. And I just took an example. This was, well, when I was in India, this is just before it hit the midheaven, I came back. But while the 2 years I spent in silence or in solitude, and mostly of those 2 years, once for 13 months, that's all in this period. It started with the moon square the moon when I walked into India. Then it was a full moon, the moon opposed the sun, and I was sitting in one of these meditations. I went in first for 11 days, I came out and went back in, and this was a 3-month period I spent alone, just chanting and being alone. I went from 130 to 65 pounds by the time I came out. I was almost ready to die, but I felt great because I had accomplished something inwardly. So this was happening under this full moon, inwardly, the progressed moon to my natal sun. Then I came out for a month and I went back in the room again in June of 68. And I spent 13 months in this room. So this next 13 months, I had the moon opposed Jupiter, then the moon opposed Saturn, and the moon squared Pluto. So I had there were health problems. There was some blood poisoning and things, and I had to decide whether I was going to stay in or go out, and I stayed in. But anyways, it resolved. It's a long story. I'm not even going to get into it now, but you can see how each of these little factors are other factors inside the story that puts the story together. If you're going to do someone's biography, wow, this is so incredible. You get the main things in place, and then you watch the personal things going in, and it really details the stuff going on. Okay, so by the time they got down to 1970, when the moon hit the midheaven, I left India. I traveled back to Canada, 9th house, and I established myself in Canada and became the astrologer. Sounds kind of crazy talking about it now, but that's how it happened. So then you have to calculate the moon phases. So here is the moon aspects to the moon, and it gives it whenever it's hitting, it's the hard aspects. It's conjunction, square, opposition, and the semi-square, and the 135, the sesquiquadrate. It puts those in, and you just have to be able to follow it, which is the waxing and waning. So the conjunction is the new moon. It waxes until it gets to the full moon, the opposition. And from the opposition to the new moon, it's going to be the waning phase. So you immediately have your phases. So with the moon phases, funny thing, I wrote them years ago. It took 20 years for me to feel comfortable with writing and get enough sophistication in it to write it. And one of the big things is most of the things on the moon phases, if you read most of the books you buy on it, most of the American astrologers or people who have written books on moon phases, they started with a belief system that everything begins at Aries. So it's at new moon, it starts at Aries, and you just impulse the first part and you go through the signs of the zodiac. And they've written the moon phases based on that cycle. And it's not the correct cycle, as you know. The zodiac starts at the greatest darkness, starts in Capricorn. The year starts in Capricorn. Aries is the halfway point. If you have a baby born, you can't impulse it at first. You have to be serious and cautious and responsible, or it's going to die. So you have to have the Saturn part, the responsibility first, and then it builds up where you start getting freedom and fighting for it when it's the Aries phase. So I always felt this was really wrong information for astrology. So it took me a long time to rewrite it so it didn't have that Aries impulsive thing at the beginning and the Libra thing at the opposition. Oh, be nice and opposition, be pleasant. Like, no, it just didn't work. So I rewrote it, and that's how we got our moon phases. And but this is the way of calculating it. And you all have the moon phases. Those of you don't, I'll get them sometime. This is where we're September 2019. Sometime before the end of the year, I'll have them available on the website. At the www.iastrostore.com, and you'll be able to get the books if you haven't got them, the moon phase books, the pattern type books. But the moon phase is especially important. Okay, so that gives the dates and the times of that. Then I did a printout of the new and full moons. That gave us the phases, and it had the new moons and full moons, but I made a printout just of the new moons and full moons so I could see it. But I wanted to see if there's an eclipse or not. So to find the eclipse, I had to go see the eclipses of the year I was born in, and it tells me exactly when the eclipses are, but I had to compare them to the progressed years. And the date, you can't compare by dates because a day is a year, like it's two different date systems, but you can see the degrees. So I can see that the eclipses, 3 of them were in May and June. Well, I'm born in October, so they don't count. And there was 2 after I was born, November and December, but they were at 0 Sag and 16 Sag. But then when I look at my new one, I can see there's the new moon that was 0 Sag, and the full moon that was at 16 Gemini. 16 Sag, 16 Gemini. So immediately I could see which 2 were the eclipses. Okay, now it's important to know the eclipses because the new moons are your spiritual insights. They're the spiritual impressions of your lifetime. You get 3 of them if you live long enough. And they're really deep impressions that have a profound effect for the next 28 years until you recharge again at the next new moon. And they could blossom at the full moon, which are your kind of outer enlightenment or awareness points. So you have the deep impressions and the great awareness of the full moons. This is a spiritual path across your lifetime. So trying to come up to a new moon, you're trying to get things more spiritual, and more centered. And at the full moon, you're trying to see how much you can blossom out. So this incredible pulsing, and it's important to know it's really the guidelines against it's the special energy on top of the progressions of the progressive moon and the sun that you're seeing. So knowing that there's an eclipse telling you really these are really the deepest spiritual times, the deepest inward times. It's not, I don't see it as a bad time. There might be difficult things out in the world they're forcing you to detach and go in more. And those impressions are very important. Okay, so we have to calculate all of these things. Yeah, and the moon phases. Why did I do that a second time? Okay, I was going to read one of the moon phases. Okay, let me just pull it out. Where's my moon phases? I have it here. Oops. Okay, I'll just read one of them. So we've done it. So where did I put it? It should be. I had it in the file here, but I don't. So just bear with me a minute. Should be in here. 1 second. Moon phases.